So I had to go up to Tucson sometime last year to go to a meeting, and in order to get to Tucson from Agua Prieta, you have to take a shuttle. And then on my way home, I was riding back in the shuttle. So I spent the most of the trip sleeping, but as I woke up about 30 minutes before I arrived in Douglas, as I was looking out the window, someone from the back asked me a question. And he asked me in English, which I was surprised about because usually most of the people on the van speak predominantly in Spanish when they're on the van. So anyways, this guy asked me about the area that we were driving through, and he was a pretty young guy. He looked about 21, 22, and he just didn't look like your typical Douglas resident or your typical Agua Prieta resident. He was a little bit trendier. He had pretty fashionable clothes on, and he looked kind of sporty. And most people in Douglas and Agua Prieta are pretty casual, and there are a lot of ranchers, and people dress like vaqueros, or people from the north, sort of like cowboys. So he just looked a little out of place, and I was surprised because I thought he was either from Agua Prieta or he was going to visit family in Agua Prieta. So it became clear that he didn't really know this area very well. So I told him a little bit about the area and what we were passing and about the mountains. And then I asked him what he was doing there, and I can't remember his name, but he did turn out to be about 22 years old, and this was actually the first time he was in Arizona. He was from Uruguay. His family was from Uruguay, and he had lived in New York City actually since he was 5 years old, and his parents had moved him and his family to New York City, where they had other family members, and they went there to find work, and they had lived there peacefully and happily for, I guess, about 17 years, since he was 5. And with the recent attention on immigration and legal documentation, his family was really suffering. They had never had paperwork, and they had never had legal documents to be in the U.S., but they had worked and lived in New York for 17 years and had had no problems before. And this guy wasn't really from Uruguay. Although he had been born there, he was just another American young person. He had grown up in New York City, had gone to elementary school, middle school, high school, and college in New York City. And so New York was his home, and the U.S. is his home, and it's really all he knows. So their family was really hopeful that there would be some large-scale immigration reforms. And with the new Congress coming in over the last couple of years, they had a lot of hope for what that meant for their family, and they had a lot of hope for finally gaining legal citizenship to the U.S., because it had just been too hard and too long and too expensive to do that before. But he just couldn't wait. He was working in a factory outside of the city and had heard about a lot of employment rates in the area, and so he didn't want to get deported to Uruguay. He didn't want to have to leave his family. He didn't want to have to leave everything he had known for a country that he barely knew. So he had a dream of becoming a soccer player, and so being young and being impatient about waiting for amnesty, he decided that this was a great opportunity for him to try and fulfill his dream of becoming a professional soccer player. So I guess he had met a friend or had a contact in Mexico. someone who told him that the Toluca Red Devils were auditioning or trying out new players. So this was his chance, and he was eager to start a new life and eager to be settled and stable in a life where he could be proud and walk without fear of being deported after going to work. So he did a kind of crazy thing. Basically, he flew to Tucson, Arizona, and got on a bus to Agua Prieta. And I don't know if he had ever been to the West. I don't know if he'd ever been to Mexico. I don't think he had. But he did that day and found himself on this bus. Anyways, we talked about his dream and how he was really excited to try out and how he was just really excited and looking forward to a new life in Mexico. I felt a little odd talking to him on that bus and hearing his enthusiasm and his innocence as he set out on what was such a hard and difficult journey, a journey that might prevent him from ever coming back to the U.S. So I felt a little sad when I had to tell him when he asked me what I did on the border. And I told him that I worked with a border ministry, and that one of the main things that I did was work with a migrant resource center. And we provide services for migrants who have been detained and either deported or repatriated from the United States by Border Patrol. And so I'm sure he had heard about things like this, and I'm sure he had heard about the difficulty of migration, but it had always been so distant. It wasn't something that he had ever had to deal with living in New York City. Anyways, we had a really nice talk, and I said goodbye to him at the border. I was staying in Arizona, and I explained how to get to the bus station in Agua Prieta to him. So I watched this guy who was my age and who had probably had a pretty similar life to me. And I watched him walk with his 2 suitcases and his cleats, his soccer cleats strapped on his bag, and watched him walk into Mexico and into another country and leave behind the U.S. for now. So I'm not sure what happened with him. I'm not sure if he made the team or if he realized how irrevocable this decision might be and how difficult it might be to come back and see his family. And I just couldn't help but think about our similarities and our similar ages and our similar lives growing up in the U.S. and how we would have very identical experiences and very identical histories, except for the fact that his parents weren't from the U.S. and mine happened to be. So I just thought about how lucky I was and how randomly lucky I was to not have to worry about things like citizenship at the age of 22 and about worries of being deported to a country where I might have been born but didn't really know. And I guess that just hit me about how random it was that he had been born in a different place than I had, and how we were no different on the outside or on the inside really, but how this this element made us really unequal in the United States, and really made one of us seem worthy of living in the U.S. and another unworthy of living here, according to the government and according to immigration standards.